June 25, 1950. The Korean War begins as North Korean troops, led by Russian-built tanks, cross the 38th parallel and launch a full-scale invasion of South Korea. 2 days later, United States President Harry Truman announces America's response.
At noon today, I sent a message to the Congress about the situation in Korea. We have sent land, sea, and air forces to assist in these operations. We have done this because we know that what is at stake here is nothing less than our national security and the peace of the world.
Military policeman Woody Powell was part of those American forces from October 1952 to July 1953. And in this first-person flashback, he shares his memories of serving in the Korean War.
I was in a K-9 unit.
A K-9 unit?
And it was the first one ever used in this particular way to provide air-based defense. And it was all-night duty. We were given 800-yard areas to cover with a man and a dog and a .45 caliber pistol and a whole bunch of ammunition and a radio that sometimes worked. And
the emphasis on sometimes.
Right. And the ammunition was old and it sometimes worked. But we were pretty effective. The Koreans were afraid of the dogs, and we were able to spot a lot of guerrilla activity before it actually came down to the borders of the base and headed off. And we walked a different post every night. Oftentimes we took sniper fire in the early hours of the morning before we were picked up, usually, when they could see us. And it was a fairly nervous duty, but it certainly wasn't hot and heavy combat.
Talk a little bit about the physical nature of being there. Was it lots of mud? Was it lots of cold? What was it like?
When I got there, it was winter, and it was very, very cold. We were first put up in these old Japanese barracks that were stuccoed, and most of the stucco was gone, so the wind would come through the cracks. And we were on canvas bunks. We were given one blanket. And I made the mistake of putting the blanket over me, where I should have put it between me and that canvas. And I just practically froze to death. We had these stoves that put out a furious amount of heat, about 5 feet, and then it was cold from that point on. And I remember going to sleep with my boots on and then waking up and breaking out ice from between my toes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was very cold, and we didn't have proper cold weather gear. We were given a lot of secondhand stuff. I had a Powell jacket that was one size too small. I had a great long knitted scarf that I got from the Red Cross. Wrapped that around me, and a Powell cap, and then just long johns, fatigues, and jump boots. And you know, if I put too many socks in my jump boots, and then it was too tight, and that was cold. So I was constantly on the move, you know, and I couldn't stand still.
You couldn't win for losing, so to speak.
I couldn't win for losing, and I remember there was a warehouse that had flight jackets, these very nice warm things that the pilots wore, you know. And I remember we stole one from there, and whenever one guy got the coldest post, we would pass this jacket on. So that's how we dealt with the cold.
Did you worry at times whether or not the people around you were on your side or another side? Absolutely. And how did you communicate with them?
Yes, we worried, and sometimes we just took a hostile stance and ran them off, and it got very complicated because our government, I think, made a huge mistake and cozied up to an organization called the National Police, which was a creature of the Japanese occupation. They were very, very corrupt, and I remember we were tasked with posting them on the perimeter, and then we put our dogs out beyond the perimeter, and those guys would shoot at us at night to make us take cover to allow people in. So we were not very popular, and I just remember being very, very cautious about any relationships with them. I remember there was a lot of pilferage from the bases, there was a lot of sabotage, there was a lot of guerrilla activity where I was, and you couldn't tell what people who worked on the base during the daytime, what they were doing at night. infiltrating and trying to take us out. So I don't think we were terribly popular throughout most of the portion of South Korea that I saw.
The most difficult part of serving in the Korean War for you?
Children.
Children.
Children. There were an awful lot of children that were orphaned and just wandering around and starving and dying and freezing to death. I remember coming across a couple of little boys in a little shack alongside the river, frozen in each other's arms. And we did what we could in our unit, the K-9 unit, to feed them, give them tasks to do to earn money, earn not money, but food and building materials. I developed a relationship with a young boy when I was at that National Police headquarters. He was kind of a gopher boy that was there. And I was there one night on liaison duty, and they brought in an old woman who'd been caught stealing from the base, and this police lieutenant, who I had come to hate, started beating up on her. I stopped that, and the boys saw that, and there was an old man in there, an old papasan with that little gauze hat that they wore. And the boy was also chewing gum very loudly. This is crazy. He was chewing gum and very loudly. So I had first stopped the beating up of that woman, and I caused her release, which really pissed off the lieutenant, and that's just too bad about him. And then I took the boy to task for chewing so loudly. Well, the boy went and talked to the old man, then went out, came back in with an egg. Now, eggs were just extremely valuable then. And he presented this fresh egg to me. And he said in English, because he apparently got the words from the old man, "You are a gentleman." And I thought, oh my God, and what am I going to do with this egg? Well, I accepted the egg, of course, and then I had a thought, and I punched a hole in one end of it, sucked out the contents with great apparent relish, and then drew a face of him on it with a ballpoint pen and handed him the shell back. Well, that little boy eventually led me to a farming couple who were taking in kids that were wandering around, and they were having a great deal of difficulty, and they didn't have enough clothing for the children. They were putting them up on a pallet in a basement that was under a foot of water. And I remember writing back to Berkeley a letter that got published in the local newspaper asking for clothing for the children. And my brother, who was working my younger brother, he was working as an assistant manager at the movie theater there. He had a wonderful idea, and he held a Saturday afternoon matinee performance, and the price of admission was clothing for the Korean kids, which had been publicized in the newspaper. And it was hugely successful. And I got a call from my commanding officer, Captain Marlette, saying, "Woody, come on down here, we got a real problem." We had this little APO, and this huge mound of boxes outside the APO that wouldn't fit in it. And he let me requisition a Jeep and a trailer, and my buddy Scotty laid himself over this teetering pile of boxes, and we carried it out to the farming couple. And we started distributing clothing. Turned out a lot of it wasn't suitable for children, and I was initially very disappointed. But that same boy said, hey, this is wonderful. So we got all this adult clothing. We had furs and fedora hats and overcoats and shoes, and we took it into town and got building supplies and bags of rice on the black market, and were able to start this construction of a dormitory there. And it eventually became an honest-to-gosh orphanage that got official recognition. I was able to get some more funding for it through the chaplaincy.
What a wonderful story.
Yeah, well, the best part of it is, for me personally, is I was a very, very angry and confused and disturbed young man because of all this distrust and the hate that I felt around me, and the humanity that was demonstrated by that couple brought me back to my humanity, introduced me back to myself, if you will.
You actually wrote a poem about that.
Yeah.
Would you take the moment to share that?
Sure. Yeah, The Gift of the Children. They were two boys, embracing death together, frozen in each other's arms. I saw this and knew how it could happen in this war of mine, where children were torn from fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters lost to each other, and men and women in uniform were separated, at least temporarily, from their good natures. These boys were killed not by bombs and bullets, but by unreasoning hate. Yet, what was there to hate in those small bodies ground down by the massive neglect of armies devoted to war? Then a boy I had come to know took me by the hand and led me to a small farm, where the old farmer and his wife, though very poor, gathered in every child that passed their door. They gave shelter, a little food from their scant stores, and the gift of life in the midst of death. What was there to hate in that act of love? I saw this too, and could not hate any more.